I'm Jess, and today I'd like to start off my channel by making a book recommendation of The Fire Sermon by Francesca Haig. The Fire Sermon's actually a trilogy, with the first book giving the trilogy its name. The second book's called The Map of Bones, and the third is The Forever Ship. I'd recommend this trilogy to readers of fantasy, dystopian, low-key sci-fi, and as well to young adult readers who are looking to find something in the adult section that's not too far away from their comfort zone. Beginning to read The Fire Sermon, I wasn't completely sure why I hadn't found it in the YA section of my local Waterstones, but as I continued to read on through, I started to understand why it wasn't necessarily going to be classified as a YA book. In young adult fiction, I find there's very often a key romance that will carry you through slower moments in the plot. And in the first book, there's a very subtle romance going on in a long period of travel, but the main focus is on world building and making you realise the influence other characters in the plot have and how far it stretches, no matter what these people are trying to do to get away from them. The situation that the characters and the world is in is complicated and thought-provoking in a way all good books I think should be. When I started the trilogy, I didn't really know what to expect. All I knew was it was this kind of post-apocalyptic world where everybody was born as part of a twin. One was the Alpha and one was the Omega, but that was enough to get me interested. I've always found twins to be this really hypnotic, strong sibling link that I don't think we get a chance to read enough about. I myself have 3 sets of twin cousins and my stepmom's also a twin. So to give you more of an idea than I had, I'm going to give you a quick run through of the first maybe 150 pages of the first book with as few spoilers as possible. The trilogy occurs a couple hundred years after an event they call the Blast, which is a fire that scorches the planet. I assume this is a nuclear blast because the radiation would explain lots of the mutations that happen to humans and other species, and it would also explain the huge taboo around technology in the years following. The human race is nearly made extinct, but they adapt and mutate. Everyone is born as a twin. One is the Alpha, they're stronger and less likely to get ill, and the Omega has got mutations. These mutations could include having an extra eye, ear, mouth, arm, or could mean that they're born without an arm, without a leg, or sometimes without much more vital organs. That's really one of the things that gets you in the plot as you meet new characters, the absolute range that these mutations can take. Most of the mutations are visible and easily spotted from birth, so when the twins are born you can easily identify the Omega and send it away quickly to other Omegas. They all live as outcasts together. The Omegas are branded on the forehead so that nobody can forget who they are, and the Alpha lives on in their much more fertile lands, continuing to have a much happier and healthier life. It's a very strict segregation, but the twins will never be fully apart. They can feel each other's pains and they will share each other's deaths. If your twin dies, so do you. We follow an Omega named Cass, and her mutation is one of the mind. She has visions. It's a very rare condition, and she's called a seer. Because there's no physical mutation that can be seen by anybody, it takes several years for her to be split from her alpha brother Zack. Years after the split, Zack becomes a very influential member of the council, and he imprisons his sister so that nobody can attack him through her. Cass is in this prison for a long time, and she has lots of visions of this place called the Island, where she's heard Omegas go to live freely without Alpha rule, and there seems to be a resistance building. The Alphas kind of view the Omegas as the waste of land, food and water that they're given. They would much prefer to kill them, but of course their own lifelines are attached to the Omegas. So this is where we start. We have the rumours of this safe haven called the Island, and we have the Alpha twins who just want to get rid of the Omegas. The books are fairly chunky, but they're very easy to read. I didn't find myself chewing through this and really egging myself to finish it. And I think there's a lot to be said from having a finished trilogy. You're not going to have to wait for the final book to come out. I actually went to the launch of the final book, which is The Forever Ship, on the 29th of June, and I had such an incredible time. I got there really early, I sat down in the front row seat, I got out my little notepad and wrote down the details. I really like to write down whenever I go to author events now, just so I don't forget anything interesting that they say. I think I was one of very few people there who Haig didn't personally know or hadn't met before. It was a fairly intimate event. There were glasses of wine, adorable little cupcakes. People start to come in and I don't recognise anybody yet. This isn't usual crowd of people who would go to young adult authors that I often go to the events for. But sure enough, a couple of minutes in, somebody walks in that I do recognise, and it's Peter Newman, the author of the Vagrant trilogy. He's approaching the front row, looking at me, and points to the seat next to me and asks if it's taken. And then he says, "Do I recognise you from April?" which is when the launch of his final book in the trilogy came out. It's called The Seven. And I just went, yeah, you do! This was pretty amazing in itself. We get talking a little bit. I ask how he knows Francesca. It turns out they're both published by HarperCollins and they have the same agent. That also explained why I recognised the interviewer, Juliette Mushins. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. Had a very comfortable, chatty kind of interview with each of these authors, and both of them thanked her at the end. That woman has some incredible taste in shoes. There were initial questions about what it felt like to wrap up the trilogy and finish the series. Haig said she felt relief and sadness, but also some satisfaction from the ending. She said she didn't have that sense that she wanted to go back and do more with these characters. I feel like you should know from the get-go of a series how many books there are going to be, if there's going to be a novella and where in the series that's going to take place, and also if there's going to be series spin-offs set in the same universe. Having a clearly defined number of books from the get-go gives you a real insight to the investment of time that you're going to put into a series, and when an author as well as a publisher sticks to that, I feel more trust towards those authors and publishers for future series with them. I don't feel like they're screwing with my mind and just continuing for the sake of it. I feel like when a final book is confirmed to be the last thing you will see of the characters within, it's far more enriching of an experience. You're not expecting to see these characters again. It's the final thing. Anything could happen. There's no redemption from this if your favourite character dies, and I'm so much more excited to read the Forever Ship knowing that it's the last time I will see these characters. I haven't a clue what could happen. Haig was joking about her husband, saying that he didn't need to read the series because he knew everybody would just die at the end, but she couldn't make him right, so I have some comfort in knowing that some of my favourite characters will survive. That does not mean there aren't going to be shockers. There's a pretty big twist at the end of the first book, which is something you expect of book 2 or 3 of a trilogy, not something that happens off the bat and is an offset for the rest of the books. When I sat down with Haig, I actually said to her how excellent it was that I never really guessed what was happening. Young adult fiction is quite repetitive. After reading the first chapter of a book, you can quite often tell what the end of the book is going to be. In this series, things only clicked for me about 10 sentences before the event. You can't take much credit for that. Another question was about favourite characters over the course of the books, which is kind of spoilery, but considering I haven't really mentioned any of them, it'll only be relevant when you discover them in the books. Haig said that her favourite character in the Fire Sermon was Cass, who's our main character, and I can completely understand that. I have to agree with her. Cass is strong yet weak. She's unique yet the same as all the other Omegas. There's depth to her character caused by having Zack as her twin, and even though the book is in first person, Cass's point of view, you can't really tell what she's thinking all the time. Haig's favourite character in the Map of Bones was Zoe, who I've not yet mentioned. She's a character who comes in very late in the Fire Sermon, and in the Map of Bones she gets quite a bit of character development. In the Fire Sermon I didn't like Zoe very much. She kind of sprung on us, she was quite jarring to deal with, and there wasn't any context behind why she was like that. In the second book we get that context. Having given Zoe some background, I feel far more appreciative towards her character, and I've warmed to her quite a bit so that I quite like her now. It's quite a feat to change my opinion on a character, so Haig did really well to space out the development of Zoe. In the Forever ship, Haig said her favourite character was Piper, which I am so excited about because Piper has been my favourite character through pretty much the entire series. Haig actually spoke about when she was first writing Piper and how she was probably just subconsciously thinking that she needed to make a hot Omega kind of alpha male, which he most definitely is. Another main character I've got to mention is Kip. Haig said that she puts a lot of her own humour into Kip, so lots of her best one-liners are Kip's one-liners. I personally really like Kip's witty, dry humour, so I was quite happy to learn that it came from Haig herself. Kip is a bit of a spoiler in himself, so I'm not going to say much more about him other than that I really enjoyed his character's arc. She was also asked about the covers, which I thought was really interesting. That was a reason that I picked up the books in the first place. If you look across the editions of all the different countries, you'll see that the artwork stays very, very similar. That's just because the artwork is so good. You may think that the Forever ship kind of stands out amongst these covers, and that's because the artist changed when it came to book 3. Haig was joking about how the French made their covers more classy, as the French always do, and she spoke about how in Asia all of the covers were far more striking. The Fire Sermon and the Map of Bones are one surprise after another. The world building and the segregation of people is really well written. It's thought-provoking. There are no direct solutions to anything. All of the consequences are doubled due to the linking of the twins. If you, like me, really enjoy the TV show The 100, you'll enjoy The Map of Bones. I very much got that vibe off of this book as they explored the taboo around technology a lot more. Sadly, I can't give you any hints on the Forever ship because I haven't started reading it yet. I'm currently preparing myself for the Young Adult Literature Convention in London at the end of this month. I'm going for all 3 days. And I'm also trying to battle a really big reading slump. Over the past 3 or so months I've had exams to deal with, so the only thing I've really been reading has been my notes, Aka War when that came out, and the first 2 books of this trilogy, which I raced through. This is a trilogy I haven't seen enough about on social media. It's got mixed reviews on Goodreads. Some people don't find that Cass is likeable, which is something really difficult to deal with your point of view character, but I kind of give it to her. She's had a pretty miserable life so far. Some people didn't enjoy the pacing of this book. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a long period of travel, but I find that just heightens the difficulties that people have in this world. There's no transport, you have to walk everywhere. But I suppose some people are more concerned about the destination than the journey. All in all, I've really enjoyed what I've read so far of this trilogy, and I'd like to learn other people's opinions on the books. Did you like them? Did you dislike them? Have you read other things like it before? Let me know. For now, I'm going to continue tackling my Yak TBR pile and spending an outrageous amount of money on books for the event. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll be back soon.